Shalom Lukulam. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Zoom, the English language Zoom of the Menachem Begin Heritage Center in Jerusalem. My name is Paul Gross. I'm a senior fellow here at the Begin Center, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to another conversation, discussion that we're having here. This is actually the first in a series that we're doing called someone's saying no sound.
Yeah.
Can people hear me? Yeah, okay. Whoever said no sound, it might be a problem with your speakers, because I think other people can hear me. Okay, so this series is called Many Faces of the IDF, and what we're going to be doing is speaking to representatives of different sectors of Israeli society, different groups within Israeli society, communities, if you like, who are who serve in the IDF, including groups that we don't often think of as serving, or that we are aware of contentious debates within Israeli society about their IDF service. And that's certainly the case with what we're going to be discussing today, which is the ultra-Orthodox soldiers in the army, the Haredim, serving in the Israeli army. And we have a wonderful guest, extremely, we couldn't ask for a more appropriate guest to speak to about this topic. Before I introduce him, I will just say that how this is going to work for those of you new to this. I'm going to speak to our guest for about 30 minutes or so, and then I'm going to turn the floor over to you, so to speak, and put questions to him that you have written in the chat at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So you can write questions in there as they emerge, and I will put some of them to our guest. Okay, so our guest today is Rabbi Tzvi Klebanow, who's the president and co-founder of the Netzah Yehuda Organization, more commonly known as the Nahal Haredi. He's originally from Boston in the United States. Rabbi Klebanow and his wife made Aliyah in 1983. He was later ordained as a rabbi in Jerusalem. In 1999, Rabbi Klebanow joined a small group of dedicated rabbis that, together with the IDF and the Ministry of Defense, would bring a dream to fruition. And we're going to hear about that dream of the Nahal Haredi momentarily. Before I get into a conversation with Rabbi Klebanow, what I want to do is show you a short video that Rabbi Klebanow kindly provided me with, which I think is a nice introduction to what we're going to be discussing. So let me just do the screen share here.
What's in a uniform? Courage, honor, unity. But my uniform was not enough for me. But this uniform transformed me, adding meaning that helped bind me to my people and my land. With support and stability, I grew from uniform to uniform to uniform. Established in February 1999, the Nahal Haredi started with just 30 soldiers, but today has more than 2,300 active duty soldiers and over 9,000 veterans. The Nahal Haredi Organization goes beyond mentorship and support for lone soldiers in active duty, assisting their veterans through scholarships to university, guidance for higher education, job placement, financial aid for newly married couples, and general support for settling into civilian life. Uniting with my diverse nation. Unifying my people. Because to continue to build as a nation, we must be united.
Okay, thank you very much for sending that for us and allowing us to see that. Oh, just a second. How's that? Okay. So, Rabbi Klebanow, what I want to start with is really letting us into the some of the details about the Nahal Haredi. You founded it with others in February 1999. We just saw that. What was the need that you saw that you wanted to provide?
Well, I think we need to understand that in the past 23 years since we started Nahal Haredi, so many things have changed. At the time, in the 1990s and before that, so a young Haredi man who was learning in yeshiva, and for whatever reason, decided that it just wasn't the most appropriate venue for him, and he needed something else. So he didn't really have many choices. He didn't have secular studies. His skills in math and English, they were non-existent, maybe 6th grade level. And you can't, in Israel, maybe today things are a little different. Certainly then, without doing the army, so you couldn't get a job. So you couldn't go on to school, you couldn't get a job, you weren't happy where you were, so it was being caught between a rock and a hard place. And as the Haredi community was growing, and I think if I'm not mistaken, today the Haredi community in Israel stands at about 1.3 million people. And with a community that's growing at that rate, there needed to be a venue for youth that just that needed something else and didn't find themselves learning what we call in the Kotlei Beis HaMedrash. And therefore, we got together with the Ministry of Defense and the Army, and it took a while. It took about 1.5 years. Because there were people in the IDF that were sure that Haredi youth wouldn't know how to hold a rifle this way or that way, and they certainly they can't be combat soldiers, and there was a lot of negativeness. I think we have an expression in Hebrew. We say "sof ma'aseh machshava tchila," right? So I just want to share with you a quick story. But I think it's very, very telling of this. The Nahal Haredi could not have happened without the assistance of a very special Jew. His name is Yehuda Duvdevani, and he is a retired brigadier general. He was a war hero in the Yom Kippur War, and he was in the Ministry of Defense at the time, the head of a department called, it was like the youth division of the army. It was his responsibility to understand what youth were doing across Israel. He didn't understand the Haredi youth at all. He just didn't understand. And therefore, he was really looking to better understand the Haredi youth. At the same time, somebody introduced one of our rabbis to him, and that took about 1.5 years, and only with his connections were we able to really get the Nahal Haredi off the ground. Now, what's so fascinating about Yehuda Duvdevani is that his father was the commander at the Battle of the Latrun in Kom HaMedina, when the establishment of the state. And his father, we all know the Battle of the Latrun was a catastrophe, and most everybody was killed. And his father was the commander. His father also was killed there. And somebody that was able to escape, so told the story, and they never found his father's body. So for 50 years, Yehuda at that time was 5 years old. For 50 years, so the family would go up to Har Herzl every year. There's a kever there called the kever of Ploni Almoni, the unnamed soldier, and the family would speak as if that was the father's grave. Anyway, after 50 years, they found a mass grave, and his father's body was identified, and he was brought to rest at a real grave in Har Herzl. And that was the time when we started the Nahal Haredi. My Chavrusa and I, Rabbi Bar Chaim, we attended the first Azkara that was for Yehuda's father. And Yehuda spoke there, and that's what's so important to hear. Yehuda is a Chiloni. Chiloni is a secular Jew, but with a very strong Jewish attachment, of course. And he said to his father that in Hebrew he said, Abba, he says, Ani lakachti ala atzmi mesima chadasha. I took upon myself, Abba, a new mission, lechot et hakera sheba'am, to mend the tear in the fabric of Israeli society. And I think that as much as he knew what he was saying, I'm not sure if even he understood the power of what he was saying, because one of the big things that we face today is this social lack of social cohesion, and Nahal Haredi is a very, very big, may not be the total answer to that, but it's something that was really, really doing something and bringing a lot of people to respect each other more and to do more. And that's the Sof Ma'aseh Mashal Tila. That's how it got off the ground. That was the real impetus behind it. We needed to have a venue for this youth. Nothing existed. And therefore, we started this with 30 boys in 1999. And it took a while. There was a lot of antagonism in the early years. There was demonstrations against us. Many of our rabbinical staff were attacked, and it was like the wild, wild west for about 4 or 5 years. But that's pretty much that's history. And if we fast forward, today there's about 2,400 soldiers at any given time. That makes up a battalion called Netzah Yehuda. Makes up different plugot, one in Tzanchanim and one in Givati.
Paratroopers. Tzanchanim paratroopers.
Paratroopers. Givati is an infantry unit. In Nivatim, we have a pluga. We have a company of soldiers that provide security for the largest Air Force base in Israel, in Nivatim. Nivatim is the size of Tel Aviv and Yaffo put together. That's where the F-35s are. And it's a company of Nahal Haredi soldiers that provide security. We have soldiers learning to be truck drivers. We have soldiers in the Air Force in the technician type of work. So 23 years later, the number that was shown on the quick movie, the movie is so great, but it's a little bit old. And one number that we didn't fix there was the amount of veterans. It's actually close to 18,000 today. So we're about 2,300 active soldiers at any given time, and we have about 18,000 veterans.
Amazing. So, I mean, I think our audience here are well-informed people who keep up to date with what's happening in Israel. Some of them would have even participated in a Zoom conversation I had a few weeks ago with a Haredi rabbi about the elections and the Haredi political parties. And they are, I think, one of the sort of questions that I think immediately comes to mind after hearing what you're saying is, what's the response in the Haredi community to this? Because looking at it from the outside, I think many of us would think, this must be really controversial. There must be a lot of opposition from Haredi political leaders, rabbinical leaders to this, just because of how we understand or think we understand the way Haredi society views army service. So how accurate is that depiction? And secondly, how does your organization negotiate that relationship with the political and religious leadership of Haredim in Israel?
Mm-hmm. I think that in general, the issues that we had were much stronger in the beginning. In other words, it was an unknown. Right. So when you talked about taking Haredi youth and putting them in the army, so everybody conjured up in their minds the idea of we were taking out boys from yeshivos and putting them in the army against their will, and then they were becoming non-religious in the army. And the truth is that there were two things that had to change in order for people to start to look at what we're doing in a different manner. One thing that had to change was that the unit had to be shown that it wasn't just another ploy by the Haredi community to make it look like they were doing something that they really weren't doing, but that this was actually a unit in the army that the army was interested in, and it was a unit that could accomplish things and be beneficial for the IDF, not just to be, as what we say, Yotzei Zayin, not just for the sake of being there. And the other thing that had to happen was that it had to be shown that it was really an environment which provided for a Haredi young man to perform meaningful service as a combat soldier, but without having to compromise on religious issues. And he would actually be able to not only stay religious, but he would be able to flourish there because the environment was an appropriate environment. And that took a little time. It did take a few years until the unit became a real battalion, and then we had a division commander that decided to bring a very special Magad, a Mefaked Gdud, a battalion commander who was experienced, and then they moved us out of the Jordan Valley and they moved us to Jenin, and it takes time. Everything took time, but once that happened, and the Gdud started to get what we call Kabbalot, the battalion started to get recognition, and they were getting awards of excellence, and they were making arrests, and they were stopping terrorists. So there was nothing, sort of like there was nothing to say. Nobody could open their mouth and say, "Oh, they're not really doing anything," because everybody understood. And the other thing was that the kids would come home, the youth would come home, and those that were lucky enough to come home, that's another subject. Those that did come home, so parents saw that. Well, one second, Ruvain never went to shul Shabbos morning. All of a sudden, he's coming home and he's getting up and he's going to shul. So these things, had to take place. And then once that happened, people started to see that this is something that has real value. Now, in the political arena, politics is politics. And there still is, on a political level, there are those that are very pro, and there are those that are they're certainly less pro. I think that it's honest to say that the Shas political party is totally behind the Nahal Haredi. I think that they support our activities, and not support financially, but I'm saying, but they're behind what we do. And I think even in the other political parties, which publicly will refrain from making any positive statement, but behind the scenes, they understand the need, and they're much more supportive than what they would be willing to say publicly.
Right. Yeah. No, that I can imagine. What you hinted at something just now, when you talked about soldiers going home or not going home. And the question obviously arises of what happens when a young man wants to join and his family don't support his decision. What can you say something about that kind of situation, which I'm sure does arise?
Yeah, not only does it arise, but it's a very, very big issue. Today, in the regular army, so a lone soldier, let me define what a lone soldier is in the IDF. In the IDF, a lone soldier is somebody who doesn't have parents in Israel. So we have what are called machalnikim, boys and girls that come from abroad to serve in the IDF. And they live in America, the parents are in America, and they come to Israel. And when they come, so they're given a status which is called a lone soldier because the parents are not in Israel. Now, in the regular, what we call Klal Tzahal, the regular army, I think the number is somewhere around 5%. 5% of the standing army would be made up of volunteers that come from outside of Israel and are called lone soldiers. In the Nahal Haredi, unfortunately, we have a different definition of a lone soldier. It's a soldier that has parents in Israel, but he doesn't have a home. Because unfortunately, many of the soldiers, once they recruit, and again, it's recruit because they have a way out of the army, so they're not draftable. They can get a deferment. So if they come into the army, they're actually recruiting into the army. And once they recruit, then parents, for one reason or another, and there's a whole bunch of reasons, because it complicates things dramatically in their lives, but they don't want the son coming home. And what's that young man supposed to do? So he goes into the army, goes to basic training, and on the first Shabbos, everybody goes home, but he doesn't have a place to go to.
Yeah.
So it becomes a real issue. This is one of the main reasons that there is an organization which is called Amutat Netzah Yehuda. It's the civilian organization that partnered with the Army and the Ministry of Defense at the start, and continues to accompany the soldiers on a daily basis, on the daily basis in all the bases around the country. Now, that's very important because we have a staff of about 35 rabbinic mentors that visit these soldiers and identify issues. Today we have no less than 17 different apartments around the country, and we have about 140 beds for lone soldiers.
Wow. So
in the Nahal Haredi, I would say 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the numbers were close to 30 to 35% of the soldiers were classified as lone soldiers. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Today, thanks to a good outreach program from our rabbinic staff that does reach out to families and does reach out to parents and tries to find the bridge there and bridge that gap, there still is about, I would say, 22, 23% of the soldiers are still classified as lone soldiers. They're the ones that are filling all these beds.
Wow. Okay, but it's interesting that part of your strategy for dealing with this is actually also, as you say, reaching out to the families, to the parents, and trying to get them on board in some way, which I imagine is sometimes not easy.
And what we do now is we have, every time there's a new recruitment and a certain number of months after the recruitment, in our offices in the central part of Jerusalem, we have an office center. In that center, we have a parents' evening, and parents come and they can meet with the rabbinic mentors, and they can ask their questions, and they can, express their issues, and they have a channel to do something to.
And I imagine one of the ways, or one of the most important ways in which you would seek to sort of assuage their fears, should we say, is that you're letting them know that what you're providing is an entirely religiously or halachically observant environment for them, that they're not going to be and you'll correct me if I get any of this wrong, but they're not going to be, as might be one of the fears, mixing with firstly with girls, with female soldiers, and also with there's no possibility they would mix with secular or non-Jewish soldiers who might bring in unkosher food, for example, and trafe up the kitchen, that kind of thing. This is something that this is different from the regular IDF provision,
right,
where the IDF would say, yeah, sure, we keep kashrut on the bases and we have a good environment for religious soldiers, but you're going one step or several steps further than what the general IDF provides for religious soldiers, right?
Right, 100%. And this was really the two issues that had to be dealt with. Was one of not having women on the bases. In the regular IDF, there's no such thing. There are women soldiers everywhere, and it was just. I'm not stating what the regular army should do, but for the Haredi, if they wanted Haredi youth to join the army, so it was a non-starter, kol zman, that there would be women in the units, and therefore the army made that happen. The army can do whatever it wants to do. They just have to decide that they want to do it, and then they know how to do it. And also for kashrus as well, They have all the food is mahadrin. They also have their own mashkichim, unlike regular army bases, which may not have. They have their supervisors that make sure that the products that are coming in are mahadrin, and that also that the kitchen is locked if it's not the time to eat. So there's more control. But it's an amazing environment. I just want to say one thing, because nobody should think for 1 minute that because they don't have women in their units, that they're not working with other units. The Nahal Haredi, Netzah Yehuda, or in Givati, or in Tzanchanim, they work with all other units together. There's no, the work that they do is at the highest level, and it's in complete, cooperation with other units. Until very recently, so for the past 7-8 years, the Nahal Haredi Netzah Yehuda battalion has been in the Shomron, Binyamin. And really, they are under the Kfir Brigade, and the Kfir Brigade deals in counterterrorism. So what Nahal Haredi soldiers would do is chase mechablim from 10 o'clock at night till 5 in the morning. That's what mechablim, to chasing terrorists. That's right, and that's a very, 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 very challenging work. It's very grueling. It's very hard, and it's very, very difficult work. And they did a fabulous job. Now, just about 2 months ago, so the unit has been moved now up to the Syrian border in the Golan, and they'll be there for the next 7 or 8 months.
Okay, and there's a lot of questions coming in, but I'm going to ask one last question, and then I'll get to the questions that our audience have provided. One of the things that was shown in the video, which I confess I wasn't aware of at all, was that there's a post-service assistance that you provide as well. We saw the assistance in with education, going to university, that kind of thing. Is that, firstly, I'm interested in how that works practically, what you actually do to help them. But also, it seems to me that might be something that would also rub some of the Haredi leadership the wrong way, because you're taking them, because they've done the army, but then you're taking them away from the outside of the bubble of Haredi society.
Right. Right. I think that if we're honest with ourselves, then we really do understand that once a Haredi young man goes into the army, he is in a different place.
Right.
And that's not to say that there isn't a certain percentage of boys that when they finish their army, that they go back to yeshiva to learn. And I would say maybe 10%. But for the most part, these are young men that are looking to be able to enter the workforce, enter society, get an education, get a good job, provide for their families. This is what they want to do. Right. I think that the Haredi community in itself is really supplying a lot of different venues for Haredi youth that don't do the army, right, in order to get an education and move on and be able to get work. I know Kiryat Ono has a lawyers program. I don't know how many 100 lawyers a year are being pumped out from the Haredi community. They're not doing the army, but they are going to the workforce, and right, that's one of the reasons why the Nahal Haredi is so important. We talked about bitachon. The biggest concern in the country is bitachon. It's kalkala, and it's the social cohesion,
security and economy.
Right, security and economy. And Nahal Haredi addresses both of these issues, and it's they're doing their part.
Fantastic. Okay, well, it's a fantastic, wonderful introduction that you've given us in response to my questions. And now we have a bunch of questions that have come through from the audience. So I'm going to put some of those to you. A question here from Shmuel. This is asking your personal opinion, and you can decide how you want to answer this. But he wants to know whether you think, in your opinion, whether it would be preferable if all Haredim served in the IDF or in some kind of national service, some kind of Shirut Leumi?
Yes, I think the answer is absolutely not.
Okay.
And I mentioned before Yehuda Duvdevani, who was one of the real key people that started the Nahal Haredi from the Ministry of Defense. Yehuda himself at the time, would go on television and he would address Haredi youth, and he would say, if you're learning in yeshiva, az tilmad v'techazek otanu. If you're learning in yeshiva, so learn and strengthen the Jewish people. But if you're not learning in the yeshivot, then your place is with us. So we're not looking to take, boys that are learning properly in yeshivas. There's no future of Am Yisrael without Torah being learned. And therefore, those who are really learning and spending 16, 18 hours a day learning Torah, we need them to be plugging away in the yeshivot. But there's a lot of youth that's not the way they want to spend their lives, and they need something else. We're talking about thousands. I think that the potential recruitment from the Haredi community is something around 12,000 on a yearly basis, and we're right now at about 10%. So there's maybe about 1,200 soldiers recruiting each year into all of these different units. In other words, there's still a lot of place for growth. One of the things, by the way, which is really important in my mind, it's an absolute game changer. We've actually started a Mechina program. We've started a program for boys that are younger than 18, at 17 years old, to come into a Mechina program, to have a year preparation, both in yeshiva studies and also in pre-military training, and in some secular education. And then following a year of preparation, they'll serve 2 years in Netzah Yehuda as combat soldiers. And then the 4th year, they come back and continue their education. This is going to take, we just started this about a year and a half ago. We have about 40 to 50 students in this program. At the end of 10 years, we hope that we'll have a few hundred students. And once that happens, I think that things are going to change. I think it's a real game changer.
Okay. I think it's a really important clarification that you gave there, because what you made clear in your response to the question was that Nahal Haredi is not there to persuade Haredim to join the army. It's there out of a recognition that the traditional, or what has come to be the traditional Haredi lifestyle of learning for indefinitely, I guess, in yeshiva and kollel is not for everybody, and therefore you want to provide the option for those that are not there. By the way, also for those on the audience who aren't familiar with the concept of a mechina, it's a pre-army academy, which initially was started many years ago in the national religious sector, and now there are many of different kinds, including secular ones. And this is now very interesting to hear from Rabbi Klebanow that there is now a Nahal Haredi mechina. Okay. So a few more questions. So I think, given what you said about the approach to those that want to continue studying should absolutely be continuing studying, I think I know the answer to this, but let me put it anyway, because I want to give you the chance. So Jonathan says, has there been any serious efforts to recruit from among the best and the brightest in the yeshivot to units such as A200, the elite intelligence units? And if so, how successful has that been? Has that been something that's been attempted, or that you thought about, or it's not part of the agenda?
Well, it's not on the agenda to take serious boys that are learning out of the yeshiva.
Okay, fair enough.
That's not to say that there are not boys that on their own will opt to do that, because there's an option to do that. But they'll have to make that decision on their own and deal with that. We don't do recruiting in the yeshivot, and we certainly would not take a boy that was seriously learning Torah and try to convince him that he should serve in the army. He's in the army of Torah, and he's a combat soldier learning Torah. You have to realize that that's not an easy task, and Klal Yisrael needs that as much as it needs combat soldiers in the IDF.
Okay. There's a question here from Lauren who asks, does the IDF, by which I assume she means either the IDF itself or your organization, does it bring the Haredi soldiers up to date, she says, with education to make up for the lack of education that they may have received in certain secular subjects that you mentioned, like maths and English? Is that something that you're able to do?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I should have discussed that. That's really part of the program. The program is really twofold. The Army realized that they need to have a venue for these young men to be able to serve as combat soldiers. Today, we have, even beyond combat soldiers, we have a number of support positions, probably have 1,000 soldiers in support positions around the country as well. So it's not only combat soldiers. But having said that, the Ministry of Defense and the Army realized as well that it's not enough just to do Army service, because since these boys were coming into the Army at a skill level, a very low skill level, a sixth grade skill level in math or in English, then it wouldn't be enough just to do Army service. And how would they stand on a par with their peers when they finish the Army at 21 years old? So what would they do? So therefore, recognizing that, the Army said, what we're going to do is we're going to create a special format for Nahal Haredi soldiers. And this is a format that was really borrowed. That's why the word is really Nahal. Nahal is not Nahal in the sense there's a brigade called Chativat Nahal. This has nothing to do with Chativat Nahal, but it did borrow the Nahal term because the kibbutzniks had a format of service that they would do 2 years of Army service as combat soldiers, and the third year they would go back to the kibbutzim and they would work giving back to the kibbutzim for the support that they gave them all through their lives. So that was an acceptable format for Army service. So the Ministry of Defense copied that format for Nahal Haredi soldiers. So they do 2 years as combat soldiers, and the third year is actually an educational year meant to help them close down the gap in their lack of skills. So when they finish their 3 years of service, then they're more on a par with their secular peers, and they're ready to either move on in a higher education, or they're ready to get jobs and tend to the workforce. That's a very important question. Yeah.
Okay. Question here from Svi Berg, who asks, do you see Haredi society gradually becoming more open to military service?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think that we've shown that's true. It's not. I wouldn't say that people are breaking down the walls to get into the Army. Army's not easy. It isn't easy, and it's dangerous, and not everybody is running to be a combat soldier, even to serve in a support position. But it's definitely, I think, in general, one would be remiss not to realize the change that has taken place in the Haredi community over the past 10, 15 years, and it's changing all the time. The possibilities of furthering education, as I said, for many, many opportunities. And one of those opportunities is serving in the Army. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I'm a very big proponent of Machal. I think it's absolutely fabulous for youth from outside of Israel to come in to do a volunteer 18-month period in the Army. It's called Machal. It just is, it builds these young people. So when they finish their 18 months, I always say, they leave their friends behind, they come to Israel, they serve as combat soldiers. 18 months later, if they decide they're returning to America, when they come back to America, the gap between they and their peers is huge. And they've developed, they've learned responsibility. They're not kids anymore.
Yeah. This is an interesting question from Jonathan. He says, is there a definition of Haredi that you and the IDF use? Because obviously when we talk about this is a, Nahal Haredi, it's your organization is serving the Haredi public. And we hear statistics, the X number of Haredim serving in the army. So what definition is being used here?
Right. Actually, from the beginning, so the Ministry of Defense and the Army, they qualified that the Haredi youth that would be able to serve in the Nahal Haredi would be those that had a Haredi education. In other words, they went to the Chadorim, and the Army had a list of all the different educational systems in the Haredi communities. They knew exactly, and they would define, depending on whether this boy learned, whether he was Haredi or not Haredi. That would be the definition. And it needed to be that way because what they didn't want to happen was they didn't want non-Haredi youth coming to Nahal Haredi to save on the third year. In other words, a regular soldier would have to do 3 years of service. If he comes to Nahal Haredi, then he could have a third year and start his education. They didn't want that happening. This was in order to help a social issue, and they wanted it specifically for Haredi youth. So they knew exactly who was considered Haredi and who wasn't.
Fair enough. That makes sense. There's a question here from Lauren who asks, she says that she's read about soldiers being beaten up if they enter Haredi neighborhoods. And is that something that really happens? How often does it happen? Is it something that you've had to contend with your soldiers? Yeah,
unfortunately, it does happen. It seems that has hopefully become something much less frequent. A few years ago, there were a number of incidents, which is a horrible desecration of Hashem's name, by the way. It's just, I can't even describe anybody that would attack an IDF soldier. Certainly somebody that was giving so much to of his personal life as a young Haredi man to go into the army, to do anything against him is horrific. But there are a lot of Kitzoni people, a lot of fanatical people, and unfortunately, sure, it does happen. But thank God it doesn't. It's something that we see as at least for the past year or two, maybe even since Corona, that we really haven't seen it. It was actually before that there was a period where there was taking place.
Okay, I have a sort of, I guess, a theological question for you, which is that the Haredim and the national religious, the Dati Leumi, have a different relationship with Zionism and the state of Israel, philosophically, theologically, the way they think about it in terms of their Jewishness. And so the Haredim don't have the same, at least from looking at it from the outside, wouldn't have the same sense that military service is a religious duty. The defense of the state of Israel is a religious duty because the state of Israel is part of the messianic process in some sense, a redemptive process. So is that something that you have to contend with in a way, or it's not? Meaning that the Haredi soldiers don't, because they're not coming with that in their philosophical locker, so to speak, that's something that makes it more of a challenge for them in some way to feel that this is something that they want to do, that they have a sense of the same sense of duty towards it. I mean, I'm playing devil's advocate, but is that how do you see that?
I think that it's just a natural occurrence. If somebody trains to be a combat soldier and fights in the IDF, then he doesn't have to have an ideological, philosophical understanding that it's a mitzvah, not a mitzvah. He understands very well that there's purpose in what he's doing, and I think that's really one of the main changes that takes place with Haredi youth in the army. I think it's a very important thing. I always tell the following story. If you know, I did this many times, so it doesn't matter who the name is, but this is what happens. If you go up to a young Haredi soldier who's in Tiranut, he's in basic training, and he's out in the Sadeh doing basic training, you say to him, Yankel, tell me, why did you recruit to Nahal Haredi? So he'll tell you straight out. He'll tell you, I want to move on with life. I want to get an education. I want to get a job. I want to get married. He has his list of all the things that he wants to do. If you go and find that same young man a year later, when he's in a Pluga Vatika, he's in a veteran unit, and he's spending nights lying on his belly and waiting in the ambush and running after terrorists, and you go up to him and you say to him, Yankel, tell me, why did you recruit to Nahal Haredi? So 99 times out of 10, the response is going to be the same. He's going to say, he said, what do you think? I have to give to the state.
Amazing.
The same Haredi, this
amazing
transformation. And that's what happens. It is. Yeah. It is. And I'm sad to say, but I think that it's true that there's not enough recognition in this the civilian community, especially in the Haredi community, of recognizing the truma of soldiers that serve in the IDF. We have to daven for them, and we have to pray for them that they should be safe, because they're doing an amazing job. And that's the transformation that takes place. Now, the same boy, he doesn't become ideologically convinced that it's a mitzvah, it's not a mitzvah, he's not there.
Right.
But nevertheless, he understands why he's serving in the army. In the secular world, unfortunately, many people have lost their way. They don't understand why they're in the army, and it becomes a real challenge when they have to do things which they, have a difficult time philosophically doing with the population, et cetera. We don't have those issues. It's not a mitzvah like the Dati Leumi. It's not their mindset, but they are there, and they understand why they're there.
Very interesting. Thank you. You mentioned this desire in the initial period, at least for these young men to get on with their lives, and you said get a job and get married. But I'm wondering is there a problem for them getting married in the communities? Is there any kind of, I don't know, like sort of negative black mark against them because they did the army in some communities? Or to put it another way, might it be that they choose not to go back to a specifically Haredi community, but rather maybe a more diverse religious community in Israel in order to continue their life?
And I think that has changed. Initially, it was a much more serious problem. We have among the services that the Amutah, that the organization provides, is also Shadchonis. We have
okay.
The Nahal Haredi is a family, and we are involved with the soldiers from the moment that they make the decision to come into the army. We are there for them, and we're there for them through their transition out of the army. We're there at their chasanas, we're there at their britot. We're there. It's a family, and it's a very, 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 very beautiful family. But there is an issue. I think the issue is definitely easier because we have most of our veterans are definitely married, so they are getting married. There's a change. The Haredi young women that are looking for husbands that are learning in yeshivot, so they're looking for somebody else. They're not looking for a Nahal Haredi soldier. But there are many women, just like there are, that it's a different path for them, and they go into the army. So there's also a different path for those. So it's, I think that the bigger challenge is for Haredi families where a son goes into the army, and that brings another level of complexity to make shidduchim for their other children.
For their other kids, right.
Yeah, and that's something very real. It's an issue, but I think that in my mind, from the beginning when we started this, it was very important, and I voiced my opinion to the Army at every possible time that it was I had somebody that was willing to listen to me, and that is that this is about social change. The biggest fear was the Army would think that, okay, 5 years, it's a sex story, now we can normalize things. No, it's not like that. This is really about social change, and it's a project of a few generations, not 5-10 years. This is and we're already there. We already have brothers, younger brothers, older brothers that have served in Nahal Haredi. And within a certain number of years, we'll start to see children that are serving in a Nahal Haredi. But it's something which takes time, and it takes what we call orach ruach. You have to have long breath, and it's any social change takes time, and this is part of that change as well.
We have a question. It's more of I don't know if it's a question or a kind of request from Linda, who wants to know whether the general public can volunteer to host some of your lone soldiers in the sense of their not having as you said, having a family but not a home to go to, can volunteer to host them for Shabbat, assuming of course they're Shomer Shabbat and they can. Is that a possibility?
Theoretically, it's a possibility. The difference is that what we found is that most soldiers, when they have a Shabbat off, or what they call Chamshush, from Thursday to Sunday they have off, they're interested in chilling out. They're interested in being. They're not really interested in going to a family that they don't know and being in somebody else. So it's a very nice idea, and that's not to say that maybe there are soldiers that would. But for the vast, and that's why our dirot is so important. Our apartments that we have for them are so important because, by the way, the apartments that we have for them, the bed is given to a soldier when he needs it in his initial part of the service, and that's his bed until he leaves the Army, because this is his home, and we have a couple of really, really nice homes. We have one wonderful Jew who lives in Beverly Hills. He owns a hotel there, and he's fixed up two of our. We have a couple of facilities. One had 17 beds, and another one we're just doing a dedication in Kiryat Yovel in another week. There's 22 beds there, but they're really, really nice, and they give. Part of the goal is not only to give him a place to call home, but a place to feel at home.
Right.
So that's very important for the soldiers, and therefore, for the most part, they're not really interested in being hosted.
Fair enough. Okay, I think I can understand that. There's a question here. What type of professions are your veterans training for? I don't know if there's one answer to that. I guess there's not one answer, but is there a general?
Right. I think the trend is, and maybe because of the lack of education, the trend for many soldiers when they finish the Army is to get a job working in bitachon.
In security,
because that's the easiest path into the workforce.
Right.
And it pays reasonably well, and it gives them parnasa. Certainly, that's not where we're interested in guiding them to. And today we have across the board. We just had a soldier that's entered medical school in the Technion, and we have engineers, and we have many technicians. We have an entire unit which works in the Air Force, and I call them a SWAT team. What do? They learn to use huge hydroelectric equipment to pave airstrips. So God forbid an airstrip were to be bombed and planes wouldn't be able to take off. So this unit knows how to get in there and fix that airstrip in the minimum amount of time. So these young men know how to drive tractors, and they know how to do so. There are, it's a very, very good parnasa too. It's unfortunate because most of the tractor drivers we see on the street, they're all Arabs. And but these young men are, capable. That's a venue. There's technicians, handasayim, lawyers across the board.
Okay. Okay. I think that's all the questions we have. So I want to firstly thank Rabbi Tzvi Klebanow very much for your time and for educating us and letting us know about this, because I do think that even those of us who had heard the words Nahal Haredi did not know necessarily exactly what you did or the extent of it, or our general sense was more tied up in the larger political debates that we always hear about Haredim and not serving and all the controversies around that. So I think it's a really useful education for most of us. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for joining us. As I said, this is the first in this series, and we'll be continuing next week with part 2, where we'll be looking at a different population, another population that that we don't tend to think of as serving in the IDF, which is the Arab population. But did you wanted to say something, Rabbi Klebanow? I think
I just want to invite everybody to if they're interested in understanding more, we have a very nice website. It's nahalharedi.org, NahalHaredi.org. It's a very good website. And if anybody's interested in joining, we have an email list that keeps our database up to date on our activities. They can write to info@nahalharedi.org, and we'll be happy to put you on our mailing list.
Fantastic. Okay, so info@nahalharedi.org. You can do that, and you should do that. For everyone, thank you, Lily, for writing that in the chat. For those of you who want to find out about our continuing English programming on Zoom and also here at the Begin Center itself, you can go to our website or our Facebook page. If you're not on my mailing list, you should email me, paulg@begincenter.org.il, and you can get on the mailing list and then get all the information about our English events. That's also just magically appeared in the chat. Thank you to my colleague Lily for that. All right. Thank you everyone very much for joining us. Thank you again, Rabbi Tzvi Klebanow, for your time and your enlightening words. And I wish everyone a good evening or good afternoon, depending where you are. And also a Chag Purim Sameach for next week.
Chag Sameach.
Bye-bye.